Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Welcome to this week's Bible study. We are looking again at Elijah.
Right.
It's our last lesson in this session.
Been a great session, Phil.
It is. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I have too.
It's exciting to see God work in His people.
Exactly.
And today's lesson, Elijah gives us the example of leading others to serve God. And for the purposes of keeping them separate, I'm going to pronounce them Elijah and Elisha because Elisha is actually the way you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
But when you say Elijah and Elisha, my pronunciation is pretty close.
Well, I know I'm going to get mixed up.
The Oak Hill Road version is pretty close together.
Yes, they
So
are.
I'm going to say Elijah and Elisha.
If it'd been Phil and JR, it'd been a lot better.
It'd been easier.
Yes, it would.
As we look at it, the writer of today's study talks about Nelson Mandela, how he gave of himself
Yeah.
to help others and help it bring an end to apartheid, and how even when he was offered freedom,
With
he would not accept it.
Yeah.
He had a caveat there. He wouldn't be able to speak out against the oppression
Right.
that they were suffering under. So rather than take that caveat and get out and gain his freedom, he said, as long as my brothers are not free, I will not,
And I think
will
he
not get out.
spent 10 or 12 more years.
He did. He spent a long time.
After that.
What was it,
27
27 years?
something like
Yeah.
that. And I believe 10 or 15 or 12 of those were after he was offered his freedom. But he wouldn't take it.
We'll also see in the study, you can lead others to serve, but ultimately it's between a man and God, what he decides to do.
Yes.
This godly service is the highest calling that we have. It's the thing that really brings you closer to God, and it's the thing that really makes an impact on people around you. Our old buddy Gene Thurman used to say, the only thing you take away when you leave this world is what you give away.
Okay, yeah.
And he's right. And giving away a relationship with God, showing somebody the way to earn that, that it's free and that they can do it, and God wants it. It makes an impact on somebody's life.
What's the most important thing we have, Phil? Most important thing is
That's it.
our time and what we do with that time. And when we use that time to help someone be a better Christian, to help someone to understand what their role is in the Christian walk, what better way to spend your time than doing that?
There's no better way.
There's no better way.
In looking at, we have some hindsight in our lives,
Yes, yes.
being the age that we are, and still have a lot to learn, or I do. And when you have relationships with younger people especially, there are little jewels, I call them, that you can give them once in a while that really help them to realize our place in this world. You know, how we're here to serve God, and that there's really not satisfaction in anything that matches that. There is satisfaction in things that you build. There's satisfaction in things that you give away. But when you help someone change their own life through a relationship with God, that's what it's all about. That's why we're here.
It's a blessing beyond measure to you, not just to them, but to you, even including yourself.
Well, God, having encouraged Elijah at Mount Horeb, sent him to anoint some new kings
Right.
in Syria and Israel. and then set apart Elisha as his successor,
Yep.
as a prophet over Israel.
Well, last week we left Elijah and talking to God on Mount Sinai. Now, we know the journey he took to get there, and it was probably about a 400-mile trip, Phil, from where he was up on the Mediterranean Sea to Mount Sinai. And let's read what he says here.
You know, people don't think about that today. They walked.
He walked. He didn't have a car or a bus or a train or airplane. He walked.
How old is he?
He's
Up in his years. You know, he's up in his
I'm
years.
sure he's older than we are. And would you think about taking off 400 miles?
Well, I'd have to have some time.
They of course they walked most of the places they went, but he hadn't been there very long when we'll see what God says tell him. Well, God told him last week when he was there on the mountain, he said, I'm not done with you. Now get up and go back where you came from. So he just traveled 400 miles. So now he gets up, crawls out of that cave and starts back.
And go the way you came.
Go the way you came.
Don't run like no coward back.
That's right. Go the way you came. And he gave him several things to do, but one of the top things on the list was to anoint Elisha to be his predecessor, to follow in his footsteps. Now, we know Elijah had been a prophet for years and years and years, and we know that he thought he was the only prophet left, so he hadn't had much interaction. He had been living on the roof of a widow woman's house for 3.5 years. He had been in hiding before that. Do you think Elijah said, I'd love to have somebody talk to every once in a while.
Sure.
I'm going to go find this guy first, and that's the first thing he did. Let's see what he says here in verse 19 of chapter 19 of 1 Kings. Elijah left there at Mount Sinai and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, as he was plowing. 12 teams of oxen were in front of him, and he was with the 12th team. Elijah walked by him and threw his mantle over him. Now his mantle was probably called a cloak. Probably something with no sleeves in it, probably a cloak, something like that. And threw it over it. Elisha left the oxen, ran to follow Elijah, and said, Please let me kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you. Go on back, he replied. This is Elijah. For what have I done to you? So he turned back from following him, took the team of oxen, and slaughtered them with the oxen's wooden yoke and plow. He cooked the meat, gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he left, followed Elijah, and served him. What a story, Phil, in that one paragraph. It's just full of information and insight. The first thing we see is that Elijah left Mount Sinai and went directly to Elisha. Phil, sometimes when we have a job to do, what do we want to do? Just leave me alone, I'll do it.
Sometimes.
Do it by ourselves. We just, nobody bother me, I can do it better by myself, just leave me alone. Elijah wasn't like that. Elijah welcomed somebody, I think, to walk along with him and be his companion over the last years of his life, because he'd been lonely. I would think he was probably alone. As a prophet, he was a lonely person. So he went directly he didn't go to the other people he was supposed to appoint king. He went to Elisha first and found him. And now we see a lot in Elisha in these verses. It says that he was plowing, but it also says there was 12 pairs of oxen in the field with him.
What
does that tell you? Huh?
That's one of them numbers.
That's one of the numbers, but it's
One of
also
God's numbers.
It's also to us it would look like a field full of
John Deere
combines or tractors planting corn. It'd be so wide you couldn't hardly see the other side of it. When you put 12 pair of oxen, that's a big operation.
Yeah.
That's a 3,000 or 4,000 acre operation today. So it tells you that Elisha came from a wealthy family.
Yeah.
It also tells you that since he was the last guy in the line, that he was responsible probably for the other 11 oxen. In other words, he was a foreman. He was a crew member, the crew director on this operation. Elijah didn't say anything to him. Elijah didn't. What did he do? He just threw his cloak over his shoulder. Now, to them, that meant something. Mm-hmm. to us today, that would, we think, what's this crazy guy doing throwing the coat on me?
But get that nasty coat off.
Yeah,
of me.
get that off me. But Elijah knew exactly what it meant.
Yeah, he did.
I'm sure he knew of Elisha, because of his how well known he was. Elisha knew who he was, and that cloak marked the man as a prophet of God. So, but Elijah, as you see here, didn't say anything. He didn't say, "Come, follow me." He made no comments whatsoever, and Elisha knew exactly what he needed to do. Elijah left the oxen, went to Elijah, and said, "I got one request. I want to go back and kiss my mom and dad goodbye." Now we know what happened in the New Testament when Jesus called someone.
Well, he called him down, didn't he?
Yeah, he said, "No, if you got to go do that, you got to follow me or me alone."
There's a little difference here.
A little difference
For
here.
one thing, Elisha ran to Elijah. There wasn't any hesitation in him accepting this call.
Nope. And I think Elijah's words were when he said, "Go on back, what have I done to you?" He wasn't chastising Elisha. He was saying, "It's not really me that's asking you. This is between you and God. You and God work it out. If it's okay with God for you to go back, that's fine. I'm not the one asking you. God is, and you're going to have to decide whether you want to follow Him or not. But it's not me you're following; it's Him." And the writer says it probably even went so far as say that I'm just going to be your mentor. You're going to be responsible to God for your actions. So you work it out with God, and we're going to see that come into play later on when Elijah says something the very same thing. Says it's between you and God. So Elisha went back. Now he made it real clear that he was going to follow Elijah, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
When he went back, not only did he tell his mom and dad he was leaving, he took the oxen that he was plowing with and slaughtered them and made it as an offering, sacrifice to God, burned his plow and his yoke, burned them on the altar that cooked the meat on it, and said goodbye to his family forever. And I'm sure I shouldn't say that. We don't have any indication in this part of the story of him ever going back and seeing his family again. He was then a member. He called himself a son of Elijah. He was Elijah's he was to be mentored and taught by Elijah from that point on. So he says, I'm coming back, and he left him and followed him and served him. Not easy to do something like it. I truly believe, though, that he knew who Elijah was and had a good idea of what the future held for him, I think. Obviously, that family were followers of God, followers of the Lord. They had a faith in the Lord, and he didn't hesitate. Now, do we hesitate sometimes when God calls us to do things? We come up with excuses.
We do. Or we serve out of selfish motives
Okay.
without the end result in mind.
Okay.
But Elijah doesn't do that, does he?
We even know that Moses did that. Moses was a reluctant leader, right?
Yeah.
He tried to talk God out of it. Elijah, there's no indication whatsoever he tried to talk God out of anything. He said, I will follow you. And so now they're going on down, and we'll see what happens in 2 Kings.
Elijah said to him, and we're looking here in chapter 2, 6 through 11. Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord's sending me to the Jordan." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men from the sons of the prophets came and stood observing them at a distance, while the two of them stood by the Jordan. Elijah took his mantle, rolled it up, and struck the waters, which parted to the right and to the left. Then two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I'm taken from you." So Elisha answered, "Please, let me inherit 2 shares of your spirit." Elijah replied, "You've asked for something difficult. If you see me being taken from me, you will have it. If not, you won't." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire with horses of fire suddenly appeared and separated the two of them. Then Elijah went up into heaven in the whirlwind. What a story.
What a story.
What an occurrence. Elijah obeyed God's plan because he served with the end in mind. He was approaching the end of his life on earth, and he knew that. His days were being numbered. He'd been to Gilgal, to Bethel. They were places where Elijah had a prophet school, something like a seminary for prophets of the Lord. And so he gave Elisha here permission to stay behind.
Yeah.
He says, "Stay here."
Yeah.
Oh, what did Elisha say?
You know, I'm not going to do that. Where you go, I'm going.
I'm with you, buddy. He
Keep
said
my eye on you.
he was with him.
It's like he's having his farewell tour, right? You know, sometimes football players or baseball players that last year they get gifts every time they go to their last city for the last time.
Elisha, of course, had been accompanying him.
Yeah.
And as he went on this farewell tour and he visited these prophet schools, they must have thought, well, who's this guy with Elijah?
Yeah.
They must have took notice of him. And now here they are. And he pulls this mantle off and rolls it up. And he swats the Jordan River with it.
It's like,
And the waters go out and they cross over on dry land, just like Moses.
yep.
Just like Joshua did when
like
they
Joshua.
entered the promised land. But it wasn't them that parted the waters. It was the presence of God. That signified that God was with Elijah in what he did there. Now, the prophets in that school were going to be the people who brought Israel back to the Lord. So they had to know when he did that what this man's been telling us is right.
Yeah.
It's true. He's got the hand of God with him, and he's able to do these things. Jordan is close to Jericho, or old Jericho was. So it's not like they were a good distance.
Oh, it was probably today in modern day.
What was that, quarter mile?
No, it's probably 2 or 3 miles from Jericho down to Jericho's up on the bank in the valley where the Jordan River runs. Of course, Phil, now the Jordan River is about 15 feet wide right there at that point. But then it was bigger than it is now. So it was probably pretty close to the water at that point in time. But I'd say 2 or 3 miles. Maybe you could easily sit and you could easily walk there. Of course, like we've already talked, they walked all the time, thousands of miles a year almost probably. So they wasn't anything at all for them to walk down to the Jordan where they were crossing.
Well, he gets to the other side and he says, "What can I do for you?"
Yeah.
This reminds me of when they asked Solomon.
Exactly.
Did you think of that too?
I wrote it down.
Yeah.
Just like Solomon.
Just like Solomon, whatever you need. And what's he asked for?
And it was a wise answer like Solomon's, right?
It was.
A wise question. I want wisdom. This guy said, I want a double portion of your spirit.
Yeah. Something he couldn't give him.
He couldn't give him.
Just like Solomon. That has to come from God.
Right.
This had to come from God. That's why Elijah said, this is difficult.
what do you think Elijah thought? Was that a surprise to him that a lot like what you say, Elisha? That Elisha would say that, or was that
I don't think it was. He traveled with him. He comforted him.
okay?
They shared back and forth.
Yeah, okay.
You know, when you just went on a trip,
Yeah.
you know the couple you went with
Yeah.
better today
Yeah,
than
yeah.
you did when you
Yeah.
left.
Yeah. I think he was pleased with that question,
This was over quite a bit. I'm sure he was.
even though he knew it wasn't his to grant. He was pleased at the thought that Elisha had.
Yeah.
I think.
And he was pleased to the point, but yet he still realized he couldn't
He couldn't
grant
do
it.
it. I can't do it, but he said,
He gives him it doesn't give him an answer really.
yeah,
He just gives him a scenario whereby he will know if he will receive it or not.
well, but that's another one of those times when Elijah is so in tune with God, just like when he knew when he called on God to send that fire, he knew what was going to happen. I think he knew that God would grant that, and he said he gave God a way to show Elisha that he was doing what he wanted when he said, "If this happens, you'll get it." Elijah and God were tight, Phil.
Don't you think he just spoke to his spirit that quick?
Oh yeah.
Just like that.
Yes.
Tell him
I think so
that
too. Yeah.
if he sees me take you up, Elijah, then he will receive the blessing.
It's going to be granted.
Isn't that something?
What would it feel like to be like that all the time? Now, there are times, Phil, when we feel that close to God, right? But there are other times we don't feel quite that close to God. And as we talked about last week, it's not God that's moving. It's us that are moving, and God is not moving. But
In doing that and making that request, and he asked him for it, it also showed that Elisha knew he had a monumental task ahead,
yeah, oh yeah,
and that this ministry wasn't going to be easy.
no,
They were up against quite a bit. But in the end there, as he took Elijah up in the whirlwind, do you think he was emboldened by that?
Elisha,
Elisha,
yeah,
yeah.
I think so. I think yes.
Boy, I mean,
But he
if
was
a chariot
also
of fire comes between us and it takes you up,
well.
I'm gonna say, wait a minute, what about, I'm gonna say, what about me?
I'm ready to get on.
Knowing that this was his mentor and that he had just been
Yeah.
anointed to take his place and that he had trained him, it says that they had, as they continued walking
Yeah.
and talking, don't you imagine they were talking about the country and about how things were and where his ministry might be more required and where he might be in danger and those types of things as they walked along, and then all at once God says, I got you.
He might have said, "Wait, Lord, I'm not quite ready. Come back, let him walk along a little bit further before you take him away."
It was Elijah's time,
Yeah, yes, it was.
and when it's your time,
Yeah.
you're going up.
Let's see what he finishes on there with verses 12 through 14. As Elisha watched, he kept crying out, my father, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel." When he could see him no longer, he took hold of his own clothes, tore them in two, picked up the mantle that had fallen off of Elijah, and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle Elijah had dropped and struck the water. "Where is the Lord God of Elijah?" he asked. He struck the water himself, and it parted to the right and to the left, and Elisha crossed over. Elisha's standing there, and you know he's scared. He says, "Oh my gosh, now it's my turn. Am I ready? Have I learned everything I need to be taught? Have I listened it well enough? Am I ready? And when he saw it, could see him no longer, and he knew it was done, he tore his clothes, which they do and show as a sign of grief or mourning or whatever. And then he saw the mantle that Elijah had called him with, that probably, I don't know, a few months before maybe, or maybe 2 or 3 years, probably several years before. And it's laying there on the ground. He picks it up, walks back to the Jordan, does the same thing that Elijah did, hit the water, and said, "Where is the God of Elijah?" I think he was wanting God to confirm that he was going to be with him, right? Confirm what that it was his role to do, and God did the same thing for him they'd done for Elijah, and he knew at that point in time that it had been passed off to him. Don't you think he was a little unsure of himself at that time? We saw Elijah be unsure of himself one time. When was he in an unsure position? When he ran from Jezebel.
Not only that, but what about when he come walking into that widow's house and the boy's dead?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, he said, "Well, God, why'd you bring me up here for this to happen to her son?"
Things happen
Yeah.
that make us wonder where God is.
We ask questions.
That's what he asked.
Yeah.
Where's the Lord God of Elijah?
And God answered him.
God answers. He usually does. He always shows up.
I'm sure that Elisha had a few times of doubt in his life, just like Elijah did. But, Phil, history tells us that he became a great prophet for God. And in fact, that double portion of spirit that he asked for, the writer says that the Bible records almost 2 times as many miracles associated with Elisha than associated with Elijah. So God did exactly what he asked for. He gave him that spirit, and the spirit was to help him do God's will, right? A spirit of tenacity, of however you want to describe it, the ability to follow God's will and do what God wants him to do. Stand up to kings.
Yeah.
We know that Elijah did that. Elisha was going to have to do that also in his lifetime.
The other thing that Elijah taught him, was self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
That no selfishness in his ministry at all.
No.
Always putting the onus on God. It's between you and God, Elisha. It's not about me. Back when he was called, it's not about me. It's you and God's relationship. I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna mentor you, but it's your relationship.
It's your responsibility. You talked about this earlier, talking about mentors.
It helps us see beyond ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think of the people we've been. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
You and I have both been blessed to grow up in this community and have good Christian men around us.
Exactly. What a blessing they were,
That's right.
and what a blessing we can be if we take the opportunities that God gives us and the time God gives us. We talked about that earlier. It's not easy taking someone under your wing and being a mentor to them. For one thing, you have to you can't mess up when you're a mentor. You have to be on the alert and try to live as best of a Christian life as you can to be a mentor. Most of the time, though, you'll find, Phil, when you're a mentor to somebody, that you give as many blessings out of the relationship as they do.
Probably more.
Probably more. That's right.
If you make that your want to,
Yeah.
you know what you want
But
to
it
do.
takes time.
It does.
And we know that Elijah and Elisha spent days and years doing what they were doing together.
You consider the legacy that you want to leave, whether it be for your children or your associates or friends or people that you work with. It's important for us to just really hone in on what God's will is for us and try to be obedient in all things. And we ought to choose somebody, or more than one somebody's, that we can mentor ourselves and try to help along. This world's tough and it's getting tougher. I hate to think where we would be if we didn't have those mentors in our life. One of my mentors, as I was growing up, Junior Hornback, worked with Junior, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
We had a lot of good times together, but I worked for him, farming, he in Cleston, and we lost Junior this week.
Yeah.
And I know his wife, Martha, is she often listens to our broadcast. So, prayers with you.
Yes, yes.
And just hope the best for your family through this time.
You're the kind of person that Junior and Cleston both were back in the 70s when my combine burnt. Two of the people that got that together was Cleston and Junior
I have
Hornback.
no doubt.
And I knew of them. I knew them. I wasn't real close with them like you, because you live in that area with them, but they were there. And I was thinking coming down here, boy, if I get a chance to repay some of that this fall, I would love to do it because of what they did for me those
Yeah.
30, 40 years ago.
77, 78, when we had the bad winters, I can remember them using their own fuel and their tractors to bust the roads open
Yeah,
so
yeah.
people could get to town, get some food or milk or whatever they could get, you know.
Yep.
And they're just examples how to treat your fellow man. And love both of them guys.
Yep, exactly. We've had a rough week this week, Phil. We've got a lot of people in our church and our community that have been struck with COVID. We've had 2 or 3 people died, and you mentioned Junior.
We want to continue to remember Philip Duncan and Sheila, Philip's family. They've been hit with this thing, and he's really struggling. He needs our prayers.
Well,
Pray
our
to
church
God.
is full of them, and of course, today, Phil, we're recording this on Thursday, and what's happened over in Afghanistan. I mean, the world's in terrible condition right now, and we need to pray for our country, our leaders, and pray that we have revival in this country and get back to worshiping God as we should as a nation.
Well, we
So many
saw a
things to pray for.
good example through this study of Elijah, how we could do that.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us and being with us.
Yep. We thoroughly enjoyed it. See you next week.
Take care.